Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Well, hello and welcome to this episode of our program. This is Mike Saunders with Marketing Huddle. Today we're privileged to have with us Todd Adkins, who is the Director of Leadership at LifeWay Christian Resources. Todd, welcome to the program.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, it's always neat when we can get in touch with people that are making an impact for the kingdom and helping to prop up and train and motivate the staff and leadership in organizations, churches, and nonprofits that go out there and do the work. That's the biggest thing, is they're on the front lines and you guys are supporting them. So give us a little bit of background on LifeWay and then your focus within LifeWay and how you help leaders.
Well, LifeWay is almost 130 years old. It was started as part of the Southern Baptist Convention. They actually they tried to start it within the Southern Baptist Convention, and they wouldn't have any part of it. So the guy borrowed a bunch of money and then came back the next year and said, "Hey, here's a check." And then they were like, "Oh, well, actually, you can be part of us." So what I think a lot of people don't realize, when the people that do know that there's a connection between LifeWay and the Southern Baptist Convention, is that it's not funded in any way. In fact, LifeWay is a ministry funded by a business model. And so any money that we have that comes in, it actually goes back out into ministry through the International Mission Board, the North American Mission Board, and other, SBC type entities. They choose our board, but it's actually a separate entity that actually still to this day continues to contribute back. But we were founded on really the mission of creating curriculum and training materials for people in the church, and that has really remained the core of what we do to this day. Now we do a lot more events, so like a Beth Moore, which a lot of your listeners have probably heard of, or camps. I mean, there's 130,000 just students, like middle school and high school students, that will go to one of our camps in the summer. So, and then 186 stores. A lot of people know LifeWay through the stores, but really a lot of the business and ministry that happens direct to the church. So that's a little bit about LifeWay. About my area is leadership development, and what we want to do is really, when you look at the body of Christ, when you look at an individual church, we're reminded that the church isn't just a community with a gifted pastor; it's a community of gifted people, and that Ephesians 2, 8 and 9, people remember it's by grace you've been saved, but they forget the next verse says that you're God's workmanship, and that's each one of us, and He has plans for each one of us to do. So. We believe that that's not just, to show up and serve in a Sunday school class or pass out a bulletin, but there's a lot more that God has designed for people. So we want to help people become, who they've been created to be. So we want to resource them both there at the church, but also in life, because most of leadership is really transferable anyway. So that's a little bit about LifeWay and about what we do.
Neat, and a couple things came to mind when you were giving that overview. One is you said something to the effect of, people that show up and just serve by handing out bulletins or whatnot. And I would submit to you that that's a big win compared to most of the body of Christ, in the sense that so many times people show up, listen to a sermon, go home, or show up and go, I'm not getting anything out of this service. And the problem is, what are you putting into your ministry, your personal ministry to the church, to the community? So what do you guys do to help stimulate that kind of take action, personal action? Because I think that ties right in also to, before you can be an effective leader, you need to be an effective, person yourself and improve yourself and personal development, so that then you're primed and ready to go out there and help the people that you serve.
Well, totally. I think, one of the things that if we roll back a couple hundred years and look at, if we go all the way back and we look at what happened in the Reformation, you have the priesthood of the believer, the idea of the priesthood of the believer that, I don't need to pray through someone to receive Christ, or I don't need to pray through someone for God to hear me, but I can do that, the communication piece. The other piece of that is the calling piece. Mm-hmm. The calling piece is that, all have been called, all have been sent. We're not just supposed to be disciples, but we're supposed to make disciples. And when you look at that commission, it really is an as you go about your life. And so, it's not that we're all we have a tendency to look at pastors as having a special calling that's a little more mm-hmm. special than everybody else, and they have a little closer relationship or a little closer this or that, and that's just not true. I mean, the pastor has one job, and that's to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. Mm-hmm. And what we've done in our churches is, especially over the last 100 years, we have professionalized those roles and given them to staff, and staff are spending way more time doing than developing. Their primary call is to develop people, not to do the work of the ministry. And so what happens is, we do get that guy who is passing out a bulletin, and God bless him. But I would say, hey, he's taken the first step of leadership just by volunteering in that position. That is not, sure. That is a significant step. But we would say, hey, where is that person going? How are they progressing? What journey are we going on with them? We need more tour guides, not travel agents in the ministry. And by that, I mean, it's not just, hey, it's not informational or transactional, but it has to be transformational. And that happens when you have a map and not a menu. When you've got a scope and a sequence, when you've got a place that you're walking people through a specific framework, rather than just saying, hey, here's Netflix for your church, or here's a Netflix training. You can get whatever type of training you want, but to really have foundational things that say, no, we want all of our leaders to know, these particular competencies, things like that. That's really the underlying philosophy of what we do and what we're focused on. To say, hey, in a culture that is very me specific and textualized to me, that absolutely we want you to become exactly who you're supposed to be, but in order to do that, you need the foundational pieces first. Otherwise, you're going to be on cruise to nowhere.
Your resources then give them a train track to run on, and if I'm correct in thinking this or saying this, it's not a script. It's more of that train track, in the sense that you're not saying to these leaders, say these words to this group and then A plus B equals C. But what happens then is you get some people that just have, writer's block, so to speak. They can't write an email or a blog post, much less a book. But if you gave them, just using an example from business, a PowerPoint, and said, can you talk through these slides we've prepared? And they look through the slides and go, oh, yeah, I know that content. Yeah, show me those 3 bullet points and a image, and I can talk all day long about these things. So I think from what you guys are providing are these tools that help make things come to life, and then give them that structure and that framework.
Well, it's really, the way that transformation happens is not a transfer of information. It's not a knowledge-based thing. When you think about competency, even if you look at the way education kind of structures, it's based on information and time. I mean, your major is so many hours, but we all know that without experience and without coaching, it's very limited. The depth of what you're really learned is limited. So you really need an overlap of knowledge, experience, and coaching. So whenever we do any training, we're doing exactly what you said. We're not giving you exactly what to say. We're giving you some questions to ask. A lot of us that are in leadership now, especially in the church, if we go back and we look at some of the old systems and processes that we kind of shun or laugh at now, we're not better for having gone our own way on some things, because what happened was, I grew up in the middle of nowhere, Kentucky, in a place where, there wasn't, let's just say that the churches are full of good and godly people who probably couldn't ask a good coaching question to save their life. But they were a good and godly person, perfectly capable of having the conversation if they had the right questions to ask. Mm-hmm. And so that is exactly, what we want to do and what we're trying to do, is to make sure that is as intentional as possible, but also having that freedom that comes in that relationship, to allow those people to have that relationship. And sometimes we try to force that, and people say, well, you can't do that because there's not, there's not chemistry. How do you match people up? But honestly, I think if you give people a good framework, care when people actually, care about you and care about what you're doing and are investing you, makes up for a lot of chemistry.
Yeah, because we know the old saying about people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. That's right true, there, yeah. Because it's that love, that genuineness, that it's almost that shepherd feeling. Talk about your ministry grid program. You mentioned, the people handing out the bulletins and maybe the greeters or the people in the parking lot. How does that ministry grid give resources for those people all the way up to church leadership?
Well, what we did was when I first came there, they said, hey, we want you to design an online training tool for pastors. And I said, well, I'm a pastor. You're a pastor. Do you think you need to be trained? No, you think your staff need to be trained and your volunteers need to be trained. So why don't we do this? Why don't we create a suite for pastors, a suite for staff, a suite for lay leaders, volunteers, and a suite for personal development. And let's put those things together so that whether somebody is just learning, whether they're leading or they're multiplying, whatever level they're at, let's give them training that's specific for them. And so we did that. And what we did was, break it up into categories of how a church is put together. So you have, in the preschool area, you're going to have training for new people and training for existing volunteers who've been around for a while, and training for, staff level people. We put all that together. It took us a couple years to do. And, it's been out for, I think, 2 years now and going well. It's in, I think there were 46,000 and some people on it last month, using it in some way to receive training. So that is people like yourself who may teach through our materials. That training is actually on there for free. I don't know which curriculum you use, but there's session by session training on there, for our curriculum. But then it's also not just, hey, this is what's in the session. It's also, hey, you're leading a small group of adults. What are the 5 basic things? And we do that in a condensed way. We want to feed people a steak, but we're going to, give it to them a bite at a time. So you're looking at like a 5 to 8 minute session versus a talking head or something like that. Because the old way of training where we gather people together and it's one to many and it's a lecture, not many people show up for. And then on top of that, you're really training to the lowest common denominator in the room. So we like to deliver that training ahead of time. And then when people gather people together, when you flip the classroom, when people gather together, you can celebrate what you want to embed in that culture, and then actually use the people in the room that are there that are more experienced to have those conversations that we were talking about earlier. So,
when you were mentioning that, I was thinking of the phrase "flipped classroom." And you said it right as I was thinking it. And it really is something where once you've everyone's got the gist of that topic, then you come together and then the conversation, the discussion becomes that much easier because the whole group then kind of gets the feel for where the direction is going.
Totally. So if we're talking about conflict management, for instance, conflict management within a group or a team of people, everybody sitting around that table is going to have a different level of competency and understanding and experience about conflict management. it doesn't matter if, the person across the table may have taken, 2 courses on conflict management. This person over here actually has a lot more real life experience and has greater emotional intelligence and can probably edify, the people around the table. So I think it really is, it's a both and there. And, it's taking people on almost a journey of self-discovery where you can start with questions that are more general and move them into more personal, move them into, from almost interpretation to application to implementation. How is this going to change? And doing so, you really, again, that whole tour guide concept of taking them on a journey rather than just transactional, giving them information.
Yeah, I love that that concept, that word picture. Let's close with telling us a little bit about your leadership podcast and where we can listen to that and what the focus of that podcast is.
So we do, the name of the podcast is The 5 Leadership Questions. So that's hashtag 5LQ on Twitter or Facebook. But what we do is we ask, there's 2 formats really. We ask leaders the same 5 questions. And we're, like 150 episodes in by now. And it is absolutely amazing that, you've got people, when you ask, I really want to compile some of these because it's like, what does John Maxwell tell his 20-year-old self? What does Craig Groeschel tell his 20-year-old self? What does Simon Sinek tell his 20-year-old self? Because we do mix it up with business leaders and church leaders and, people from different walks of life, authors. Not everybody's a believer. Simon Sinek's not a believer, as an example. But asking them those questions and really just learning from their life experience. And it's very conversational. And there's a lot of interaction and a little bit of banter there. The other thing is we would often ask 5 questions on a specific subject. So it's like, here's 5 questions on, how do you lead people you don't like, or leading up, or, a specific subject. So that's been probably, the best thing that honestly we've done. It's really reached a lot of people in a short period of time. We're certainly blessed by that.
Yeah, I love that concept because it really is that when you ask the 5 questions to different leaders, you start to see similarities, you start to see differences, and then those principles start to just take hold. So I love that a whole lot. So for people that want to learn more about LifeWay Christian Resources, your podcast, what's the best point of contact? Is there one website where it connects the two? But how can people learn more about your ministry?
At lifeway.com/leadership, or if you want to know more about Leadership Pipeline, is that whole concept that I was just talking about of, really having a really strong conviction for leadership development, having a culture, and then having constructs, the systems and processes that get things done. That's really the underlying, philosophy of what we do, because at the end of the day, leadership is poetry and plumbing, and often we get the poetry part right, but it's the plumbing part, it's the systems and processes actually deliver on that vision that trips us up. So myleadershipppipeline.com is where you would find that.
Excellent. Well, Todd, thank you so much for your time. It was wonderful getting to know you and learning more about LifeWay.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.